Well, it's often said the first casualty of war is truth. Propaganda becomes a weapon used to distort facts and frame the other side as the aggressor. We see disinformation and misinformation in most major conflicts on the planet right now. From disinfo campaigns plaguing Russia and Ukraine, to the claims and counterclaims in the ongoing aggression between Israel and Gaza, to the lies fueling a deadly proxy war in Sudan. Now, two nuclear powers are playing the dangerous disinfo game. India and Pakistan have been bitter rivals since 1947, when British India was divided into Hindu-majority India and Muslim-majority Pakistan. The disputed region of Kashmir is a hotspot both sides violently fight over. A deadly attack earlier this month has put everyone on edge. And amidst that fear, disinformation is swirling in both countries on mainstream media, WhatsApp groups, and of course on social media. Here to help us understand what's going on in South Asia, we have Joyjit Pal from the University of Michigan, who studies the use of media and politics and misinformation in India. And from Pakistan's capital today, we have Usama Khilji from Bolo B, a think tank focused on citizens' rights to information and free speech. Great to have you gentlemen with me today.
Thank you.
So this was the greatest military escalation in decades, and running parallel to that, an intense information war was going on at the same time. Can you give me examples of the disinformation you are seeing go viral in both countries? Usama, let me start with what's happening in Pakistan.
Yes, so there's news of drones going as far as Kabul in Afghanistan. There is news of pilots being captured by both sides. And of course, a lot of this was not true at all.
Joyjit, on the Indian side, what are you seeing?
Well, the most significant piece of misinformation on the Indian side was the news of the Karachi port being captured by the Indian Navy. There was other kinds of misinformation, likewise, about pilots being downed, etc.
There's been violence, we know, between these countries for years. But when you look at how this bad information was moving this time, how fast was it moving? Joydeep.
So one thing that was particularly different about this time versus others is that when we think about misinformation, there are three primary drivers of misinformation as we see it. One is existential drivers of misinformation. Then there's sociocultural drivers of misinformation. And the third is what we think of simply as epistemic misinformation drivers. So epistemic means you don't know what's going on, so misinformation spreads faster. Existential is you're afraid of something for your life, and then misinformation spreads faster. So COVID would be an example of something existential. And sociocultural is when you have a second group which is defined differently, and that is an enemy group, and therefore misinformation about that group goes faster. This time you had the confluence of all these three factors.
Usama, were you surprised how quickly bad information was getting just to everyone talking about this in both countries, really?
Yeah, I think because of the nature of social media, there's a tendency for people to want information instantly. And of course, when a war is being fought and when information ecosystems are so varied and so manipulated, but also so hard to decipher, people compete to break that news. But I think what I would like to say is that on the Pakistani side, a lot of people did warn everyone of being cautious, which surprised me, honestly, because a lot of people were like, okay, don't panic, this might have happened, but we need to check and verify. And I think that's something we need to see more of in conflicts and in, high-paced environments.
Yeah, that's interesting and a good sign. I mean, we're happy to hear that, but it doesn't always happen that way. Joyjit, I'm wondering what is it about the media ecosystem in India which allows misinformation to flourish?
Well, the main driver of misinformation related to the media ecosystem is the sense of nationalism and the idea that if you do not engage with a certain line of thought, then you must by default be working against the nation. So any kind of reportage which might have suggested that there was any even small victories on the Pakistani side would be completely dismissed in such a scenario. And of course, given the fact that many of the media houses are dependent on the government for advertising revenue, means that they are more likely to toe the government line and therefore take orders from what they are being asked to report rather than having people on the ground. And,
And
the
Jagjeet,
nature.
there's blocking as well of international news sources, right? I mean, I was reading about TRT. People can't necessarily get access.
Well, there's blocking of specific information from sources that India might, the government might think of as antithetical to the Indian positions on various things. But a lot of the international sources were not being blocked. So the BBC was not being blocked, etc. So, but yes, TRT and a couple of the Indian sources were also blocked during this conflict.
Osama, does Pakistan have any other controls in place which would, help it a little bit more? I mean, I'm just wondering from this side of the world.
I think in Pakistan, it was surprising because X was blocked for more than a year. But right when the attack happened, the night of it, Pakistanis found that they could access X without any VPNs, which is what everyone had been using for more than a year. So it was shocking because it sort of felt like the state said, okay, Pakistanis, now go defend yourselves with your memes online. And that's sort of what Pakistanis did, used a lot of humor. But I'd also like to say that there's a symbiotic relationship between Pakistanis and Indians in so many different ways. So whatever we see happening in India, at the end of the day, people do try to mirror that here. So a lot of celebrities who, for example, were not, cheerleading war were being attacked in Pakistan in certain sections of social media saying, why didn't you speak up in support of the country? So that does have, a domino effect from across the border as well.
I'm wondering, when this, especially when we're talking about disinformation, which, might be a little bit more of governments trying to say we won this war or we're winning right now. In terms of that, is that done to shape local opinion or global opinion? Osama, I'll start with you.
I think local opinion definitely plays a big role, and we see that on both sides of the border, because the war is then seen by political actors, by other state actors to see how can we benefit from this domestically, and I think that's the big worry, because then people are taken for a ride through different narratives resulting from a very tragic war in which so many people lose their lives tragically.
Jagjeet, how much of this is a government disinfo problem versus the platforms just amplifying bad, false information?
I think it's more of the latter. There is a government disinfo problem here, which is most Indians and Pakistanis don't get to interact with each other. And when you meet each other outside of your home countries, you realize that both sides have told you that the wars in, say, for instance, 48 and 65 were won by our side. And then, you meet a Pakistani and say, what, you guys won that? Well, I didn't know that. And so then there is this story which can be controlled by the government at certain levels, which has been true in the past. But now what has happened, there's a sort of a Pandora's box effect where there were troll accounts, etc., which were working for political parties in certain given points of time. But when you have this nationalistic sentiment overlaid on top of it, it's not necessarily like the government is explicitly trying to move disinformation in a certain direction, rather than there's been a radicalization of people on social media that they're willing to engage with what they want to believe. And the government sometimes is quite willing to let that happen because people on both the Indian and Pakistani side would be perfectly happy if their people thought they had won, and as a result, the conflict just ended.
Right. I have less than a minute here, but I want to ask each of you, what is the long-term risk as bad information is flowing out during a war? Osama?
I think the long-term risk really is another war, and there's a lot of manufacturing of consent done by states and the arms industry, so that there can be more war. And I think that's the biggest worry. So citizens across the world, especially in this region, must be very wary and be critical of any narratives that are sold to them.
Jorjit.
Yeah, I agree with Osama. There was a lot of people online who didn't want the conflict to stop, and a lot of these people have actually no idea what actually conflict, what goes through people when they have conflict in raging in their homes. But the other casualty has actually been the media, which is perhaps a reasonable casualty that at the end of this, nobody thinks they can believe television anymore. In the past, there was this doubt from on television, but that came often from the intelligentsia, etc. But now it's like, wow, we were just hearing that Karachi got taken over, and looks like they're hanging out at the beach there. So,
Right. You lose
who do
trust.
we believe?
You lose trust, and you lose trust. That's the most difficult thing to gain back. Osama, Jorjit, great to have your perspective on the show today. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.